The rain was falling hard that Tuesday morning when David walked into the small coffee shop on 5th Street. His black umbrella dripped water on the wooden floor as he shook it off and looked around for an empty table. The place was warm and cozy, with soft jazz music playing in the background and the smell of fresh coffee beans filling the air. David had been coming to this same coffee shop every morning for the past 3 months. Ever since his father passed away, it wasn't because the coffee was amazing or because he loved the atmosphere. He came here because it was the only place where he could sit quietly without people asking him how he was doing or telling him that everything would be okay. He chose his usual corner table, the one next to the big window that looked out onto the busy street. The table was small and round, with 2 chairs, but David always sat alone. He pulled out a stack of sympathy cards from his jacket pocket and placed them on the table. These were the cards that people had given him at the funeral, cards that he still couldn't bring himself to read properly. His hands were shaking as he reached for his coffee cup. This had been happening a lot lately. The shaking, the feeling, like his chest was too tight, the way his heart would race for no reason. His doctor said it was normal after losing someone close. But nothing about this felt normal to David. He tried to pick up one of the cards, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. The card fell back onto the table, and David felt that familiar wave of frustration wash over him. He couldn't even read a simple card without falling apart. How was he supposed to go back to work next week? How was he supposed to pretend that everything was fine when nothing felt fine anymore? That's when he heard a gentle voice ask, "Is this seat taken?" David looked up to see a woman standing beside his table. She had kind brown eyes and long dark hair that was slightly wet from the rain. She was wearing scrubs under her coat, the kind that nurses wear at hospitals. There was something about her face that made David feel calmer just by looking at her. "No, it's not taken," David said, quickly gathering the sympathy cards and stuffing them back into his pocket. "Please, sit down." The woman smiled and sat across from him. She ordered a simple black coffee when the waitress came by, and then she just sat quietly for a moment, looking out the window at the rain. David appreciated that she didn't immediately start talking. Most people felt like they had to fill every silence with words. "Rough morning?" she asked after a few minutes, nodding toward his hands, which were still shaking slightly. David looked down at his hands and tried to make them stop, but that only made the shaking worse. "Yeah, you could say that," he replied, feeling embarrassed. Without saying anything, the woman reached across the table and gently placed her warm hand over his. The touch was soft and comforting, like when his mother used to hold his hand when he was scared as a child. "Just breathe with me," she said in a calm voice, "in through your nose, out through your mouth." David found himself following her breathing pattern, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slowly. He felt the tightness in his chest begin to loosen. His heartbeat started to slow down, and amazingly, his hands stopped shaking. For the first time in months, he felt like he could actually fill his lungs completely with air. "Better?" she asked, still keeping her hand over his. "Much better," David said, genuinely surprised. "How did you do that?" "I work at the hospital downtown," she explained. "I see a lot of people who are dealing with tough times. Sometimes a little human connection is all we need to remember how to breathe again." They sat there for a while, just talking about everyday things. She told him about her work at the hospital, how she loved helping people, but sometimes it could be overwhelming. David found himself talking about his job at the accounting firm, how he used to enjoy working with numbers because they made sense. But lately nothing seemed to make sense anymore. She didn't ask him what was wrong or why he looked so sad. She didn't try to give him advice or tell him that things would get better. She just listened, really listened, in a way that made David feel like his words actually mattered. When she mentioned that she had grown up in the same neighborhood where David went to high school, they discovered they had probably walked the same streets and visited the same places dozens of times without ever meeting. It felt like a strange coincidence. Or maybe like the universe had been trying to bring them together for years. "I love how the rain sounds on the window," she said, at one point, turning to watch the drops racing down the glass. It's like nature's way of washing everything clean. David had never thought about rain that way before. To him, rain had always just been something that made his morning commute more difficult. But sitting there with her, listening to the gentle tapping of raindrops against the window, he could see what she meant. There was something peaceful about it, something that made him feel like maybe things could be washed clean in his life too. They talked for almost 2 hours before she checked her watch and realized she had to leave for her shift at the hospital. "I'm sorry, but I really have to go," she said, standing up and putting on her coat. "This was really nice, though. Thank you for sharing your table." David stood up too, not wanting the conversation to end. "Thank you for helping me breathe again." She smiled that warm smile again, and then she did something that David wasn't expecting. She leaned forward and gently kissed his forehead, the way a mother might kiss a child who's had a bad dream. The kiss was soft and brief, but it sent a wave of warmth through David's entire body. In that moment, something shifted inside him. The constant ache in his chest, the one that had been there every single day since his father died, suddenly became quieter. Not gone, but quieter. Like someone had turned down the volume on his pain just enough for him to think clearly. "Again, or take care of yourself," she said softly, and then she was gone. Walking out into the rain with her umbrella. David stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear down the street. He touched his forehead where she had kissed him, and he could still feel the warmth of her lips against his skin. For the first time in 3 months, he felt like he might actually be able to make it through the day without falling apart. He gathered his things and headed toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, he realized something important. He didn't even know her name. And yet, somehow, she had managed to give him something he had been searching for since his father died. She had given him a moment of peace. David couldn't stop thinking about the woman from the coffee shop. Her name was Anna. He learned when he went back the next day, hoping to see her again. She wasn't there. But the barista told him she came in every Tuesday and Thursday before her morning shift in the hospital. So Thursday morning, David found himself sitting at the same corner table, checking his watch every few minutes, when Anna walked through the door at exactly 8:30. His heart did a little jump. She looked tired, like she'd been working long hours, but her face lit up when she saw him. "Well, this is a nice surprise," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "How are you feeling today?" David realized he actually felt better than he had in months. The strange thing was, he'd been thinking about that gentle kiss on his forehead for 2 days straight. Not in a weird way, but in a way that made him feel protected somehow, like carrying around a warm blanket in his pocket. "I'm doing okay," he said. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't lying. "I wanted to thank you again for yesterday. I don't know what you did, but it really helped." Anna smiled and ordered her usual black coffee. "Sometimes we all need someone to remind us how to breathe properly. It's amazing how much tension we carry without even realizing it." Over the next few weeks, their Thursday morning coffee meetings became a regular thing. David would arrive early and save their table, and Anna would show up right on time, always with stories from the hospital that somehow made his own problems feel more manageable. She told him about Mrs. Chen, an elderly patient who brought homemade cookies for the entire nursing staff every time she came for her treatments. She talked about how she loved working the pediatric ward, because kids were so honest about their feelings. If they were scared, they said so. If they hurt, they cried. If they felt better, they smiled with their whole faces. Adults are more complicated, Anna said one morning, stirring sugar into her coffee. "We think we have to be strong all the time, but sometimes being strong just means admitting when we need help." David found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't with anyone else. He told her about his father, how they used to fish together every Sunday morning when David was a kid, how his dad taught him to change a tire and balance a checkbook, and how to treat people with respect. How the last conversation they'd had was about whether David was eating enough vegetables. "He sounds like he was a wonderful man," Anna said, and David could tell she really meant it. She didn't say the things other people said, like he's in a better place now, or at least he's not suffering anymore. She just listened and let David talk about his father like he was still alive. And important, during their third week of coffee meetings, David had what his doctor called a panic attack right there in the coffee shop. One minute he was fine, and the next minute he couldn't breathe. His chest felt like someone was sitting on it, and his heart was racing so fast he thought he might pass out. Anna immediately recognized what was happening. She moved her chair next to his and took his hands in hers. "Look at me," she said in that calm voice he'd grown to love. "You're safe. You're not in danger. This feeling will pass." She guided him through breathing exercises, counting slowly as he inhaled and exhaled. When that didn't work fast enough, she did something that surprised him. She leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his temple, right where his pulse was beating too fast. The effect was immediate. David felt his heartbeat slow down, felt the tightness in his chest ease up. It was like her kiss had the power to reset his entire nervous system. The panic that had been consuming him just melted away, leaving him feeling peaceful and grounded. "Better?" she asked, pulling back to look at him. "How do you do that?" David asked, amazed. "It's like you have some kind of superpower." Anna laughed softly. "I think it's just about human connection. When we're panicking, our bodies forget they're safe. Sometimes a gentle touch can remind us that we're not alone in the world." After that day, David started paying attention to all the little ways Anna seemed to heal people without even trying. When the teenage burst to cut her finger on a coffee lid, Anna cleaned the wound and bandaged it with such care that the girl stopped crying immediately. When an elderly man dropped his wallet and all his papers scattered across the floor, Anna helped him pick everything up while chatting with him about his grandchildren, turning his embarrassment into a pleasant conversation. David began to understand that Anna's healing touch wasn't just about the physical contact. It was about the way she made people feel seen and valued. When she focused her attention on someone, they felt like they were the most important person in the world at that moment. As weeks turned into months, David found himself scheduling his entire life around their coffee meetings. He would spend his Tuesday evenings planning what he wanted to talk to Anna about. On Thursday morning, he started taking better care of himself because he wanted to have good news to share with her. He cleaned his apartment for the first time since his father's funeral. He started eating regular meals instead of just grabbing whatever was easiest. He even bought new clothes because he wanted to look presentable when he saw her. But the most important change was how David started looking forward to things again. Before meeting Anna, every day felt like something to get through. Now, he had something to look forward to. Someone who cared about how he was doing. Someone who could make him feel better just by being there. One Thursday morning, and arrived at the coffee shop looking unusually tired. She'd been working double shifts because several nurses had called in sick, and David could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "You look like you need someone to take care of you for a change," David said as she sat down. Anna smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine. Just a long week at work." David reached across the table and gently took her hand, the same way she'd done for him that first day. "Tell me about it," he said. "What's been going on?" For the first time since they'd known each other, Anna opened up about her own struggles. She told him about losing a patient the week before, a young mother who'd been fighting cancer. She talked about how hard it was to be strong for everyone else's families, when sometimes she just wanted to go home and cry. "I lost my little brother 2 years ago," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Car accident. He was only 22. Sometimes I think I became a nurse because I wanted to save people the way I couldn't save him." David felt his heart break for her. Here was this incredible woman who spent her life healing others, carrying around her own deep pain. He understood now why she was so good at helping people through their worst moments. She knew exactly how it felt to lose someone you loved. "I'm so sorry," David said, squeezing her hand gently. "He would be proud of you, of all the people you help." Anna's eyes filled with tears, and David realized he'd never seen her cry before. Without thinking, he stood up and moved to the chair beside her. He wrapped his arms around her in a gentle hug, and she leaned into him, finally allowing herself to be comforted instead of always being the one doing the comforting. They sat there for a long time, just holding each other in the busy coffee shop while life continued around them. David realized that maybe this was what healing really looked like. Not just one person fixing another, but to people helping each other carry their burdens together. 6 months had passed since David first met Anna at the coffee shop, and their Thursday morning meetings had grown into something much deeper. They now saw each other 3 times a week, and David had begun to rely on Anna's presence in ways that even he didn't fully understand. It started innocently enough. Whenever David had a bad day at work, he would text Anna. When his boss criticized his reports or when he felt overwhelmed by deadlines, Anna would meet him for lunch. She had this amazing ability to make everything feel manageable again with just a few words, and that gentle touch that always seemed to calm his nerves. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. David found himself creating reasons to need Anna's comfort. If he had a peaceful day, he would start thinking about problems that might come up. If everything was going well, he would find himself feeling anxious about when things might go wrong. One Tuesday evening, David was supposed to have dinner with his sister Kelly, something they'd planned for weeks. Kelly had been trying to reconnect with him since their father's funeral, and David knew she was worried about him. But as he was getting ready to leave his apartment, he started thinking about how Kelly would probably want to talk about their father and how that would make him feel sad, and how he wouldn't be able to see Anna until Thursday. Before he knew it, David was calling Kelly to cancel. "I'm not feeling well," he told her, which wasn't exactly a lie. The thought of dealing with difficult emotions without Anna nearby made him feel genuinely sick to his stomach. Instead of going to dinner, David drove to the hospital where Anna worked. He waited in the parking lot until her shift ended, then called her as she was walking to her car. "Hey, I know it's last minute, but could we grab coffee? I'm having a rough night." Anna looked tired, but she agreed to meet him at their usual spot. As they sat across from each other in the nearly empty coffee shop, David found himself exaggerating how bad his day had been. He made his work stress sound worse than it was, and he told her he'd been having trouble sleeping, which was partly true but mostly because he stayed up thinking about their next meeting. When Anna reached across the table and took his hand, when she spoke to him in that soothing voice that made everything better, David felt that familiar wave of relief wash over him. But for the first time, he also felt something else, a tiny voice in the back of his mind wondering if he was becoming too dependent on these moments. The pattern continued to grow stronger over the following weeks. David started calling in sick to work more often, not because he was actually sick, but because the stress of his job felt unbearable without Anna there to help him process it. He would spend entire days in his apartment, feeling sorry for himself. Until it was time to meet Anna for coffee, he stopped returning phone calls from his friends. When his college roommate invited him to a baseball game, David said he was too busy. When his coworker asked if he wanted to join the office bowling league, David made up an excuse about having other commitments. The truth was, spending time with other people felt exhausting now. No one else could make him feel the way Anna did. David also started noticing that his problems seemed to get worse right before he was supposed to see Anna. On Wednesday nights, he would lie awake thinking about all the things that were wrong with his life. His job felt meaningless, his apartment felt too empty, and he felt like he was failing at everything. But he almost looked forward to feeling this bad because it meant Anna would be there to make him feel better. One evening, David was supposed to submit an important report for work by 5 o'clock. It was a project he'd been working on for weeks, and it was actually pretty good. But as the deadline approached, David found himself paralyzed by the thought of turning it in. What if it wasn't perfect? What if his boss didn't like it? What if he got in trouble? Instead of submitting the report, David saved it to his computer and left the office early. He drove straight to Anna's apartment building and waited outside until she got home from work. When she saw him sitting on the steps, she immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, sitting down beside him. David told her about the report, about how scared he was of failing, about how nothing felt right anymore. As he talked, he could feel his anxiety building, his chest getting tight, his hands starting to shake. And then Anna did what she always did. She pulled him close and held him until his breathing slowed down. She kissed his forehead and told him everything would be okay. In that moment, David felt perfect again. All his fears disappeared, replaced by the warm feeling of being completely safe and loved. But as Anna held him, she said something that made his stomach drop. "David, you missed your deadline, didn't you?" He nodded, feeling ashamed. "This is the third time this month you've had problems at work," Anna said gently. "And last week you canceled on your sister again. I'm starting to worry that maybe you're avoiding dealing with things instead of actually working through them." David pulled away from her, suddenly feeling defensive. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm just going through a hard time, and you're the only person who understands that." Anna was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer but more serious than usual. "I care about you so much, David, but I'm concerned that you're not letting yourself heal. You're just coming to me every time something hurts. And that's not the same thing as getting better." David felt panic rising in his chest again, but this time it wasn't about work or his father or anything else. It was about the thought of not having Anna to run to when things got difficult. "You don't understand," he said, his voice coming out more desperate than he intended. "Nothing else helps. Other people don't get it. Therapy doesn't work. Nothing works except being with you." Anna looked at him with sad eyes, and David realized she was starting to look tired. All the time now, not just tired from work, but tired in a deeper way, like she was carrying too much weight on her shoulders. "David, I love spending time with you, but I can't be your only source of comfort. That's not fair to either of us." But David couldn't hear what she was trying to tell him. All he could focus on was the fear that she might start pulling away from him. The thought of facing his problems without Anna's healing touch felt impossible. He needed those moments when she would hold him and make everything better. He needed her gentle kisses and her soothing voice telling him he was going to be okay. As they sat there on the steps outside her building, David made a decision that would change everything between them. He decided that he would do whatever it took to make sure Anna never stopped being there for him, even if it meant staying broken. Even if it meant never really getting better, because the alternative, facing life without her healing touch, was too scary to even imagine. What David didn't realize was that his need to be healed was slowly breaking the very person he depended on to heal him, and soon Anna would reach a point where she couldn't carry both of their burdens anymore. The final breaking point came on a cold Wednesday night in November. David had been fired from his job that afternoon, and it was entirely his fault. He'd been late to work 17 times in the past month, missed 3 important meetings, and failed to turn into major projects. His boss, who had been patient with him for months, finally had no choice but to let him go. David sat in his car outside the office building, staring at the box of his personal belongings in the passenger seat, a coffee mug, a few pens, a small plant that was already dying. 3 years of his life reduced to a cardboard box that couldn't even fill up half the front seat of his car. But instead of feeling devastated about losing his job, David felt something else entirely: relief. Now he had a real crisis, a legitimate reason to need Anna's comfort. He wouldn't have to make up problems or exaggerate his feelings. This was actual, serious trouble that no one could question. He drove straight to Anna's apartment building, not even bothering to call first. It was almost midnight when he started knocking on her door, and he could hear her moving around inside before she answered. When she opened the door, David could see immediately that he'd woken her up. Her hair was messy. She was wearing pajamas, and there were tired lines around her eyes. "David, what's wrong? What time is it?" "I lost my job," he said, and before he could stop himself, he was crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears he usually shed during their coffee meetings, but deep, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. "I'm so sorry, Anna. I know it's late, but I didn't know where else to go." Anna stepped aside to let him in, and David collapsed onto her couch like his legs couldn't hold him up anymore. She sat beside him and pulled him into her arms the way she'd done so many times before. But this time, something felt different. Anna's embrace felt tense, and when she spoke, her voice sounded strained. "Tell me what happened," she said, but David could hear the exhaustion in her words. Through his tears, David told her about getting fired, about how his boss said he wasn't reliable anymore, about how he felt like a complete failure. As he talked, he waited for that familiar feeling of peace to wash over him, for Anna's presence to make everything better. But instead, he felt her body getting more rigid against his. "David," Anna said quietly, "you've been struggling at work for months. Did you ever think about getting help? Maybe talking to someone professional?" David pulled back to look at her, confused. "What do you mean? I talked to you. You helped me." "But I'm not helping you," Anna said, and for the first time since David had known her, she sounded frustrated. "You're getting worse, not better. You're losing jobs. You're pushing away your family. And you're here at my apartment at midnight because you can't handle your problems on your own." David felt panic rising in his chest, but not the kind that Anna usually helped him with. This was different. This was the fear that she might stop being there for him. "You don't understand," he said, his voice getting louder. "You're the only person who makes me feel better. When I'm with you, everything makes sense. I need you, Anna." "That's the problem," Anna said, standing up and walking to the window. "You need me too much, and I can't be everything for you anymore." David watched her standing there with her back to him, and he realized she was crying. Anna was crying, and it was because of him. The woman who healed everyone else, who made everyone feel better, was breaking down because of what he'd done to her. "I haven't been sleeping," Anna said without turning around. "I lay awake at night worrying about you, wondering if you're okay, wondering what crisis you're going to have next. I've been calling in sick to work because I'm too emotionally exhausted to take care of my patients. Do you know what that means? I became a nurse to help people, and now I can't even do my job because I'm too busy trying to hold you together." David felt like the floor was falling out from under him. "Anna, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I never meant to hurt you." She turned around, and David could see that her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "I know you didn't mean to, but that doesn't change what's happening. I'm drowning, David. I'm trying to save you, but you're pulling me down with you." "What are you saying?" David asked, though he was terrified of the answer. "I'm saying I can't do this anymore," Anna said, her voice breaking. "I care about you so much, but I can't be your lifeline anymore. You need real help, professional help, not just someone to hold you every time things get hard." David felt something inside him snap. "You can't leave me," he said, standing up and moving toward her. "You're the only good thing in my life. Without you, I have nothing, don't you see?" Anna said, backing away from him. "That's exactly the problem. I'm not supposed to be the only good thing in your life. You're supposed to have other things, other people, other sources of happiness. But instead, you've made me responsible for your entire emotional well-being, and I can't carry that weight anymore." David realized that Anna was scared of him, not physically scared, but scared of what he'd become, scared of the desperate need in his eyes. He looked at himself through her eyes and saw what she saw, a man who had become so dependent on her comfort that he couldn't function without it. "Please," David said, his voice barely a whisper, "don't give up on me. I'll do better. I'll figure it out." Anna shook her head sadly. "You can't figure it out while you're still using me as a bandage for all your problems. Every time you come to me instead of dealing with your issues, you're choosing to stay broken. And I'm helping you do it." She walked to her front door and opened it. "I think you should go home tonight. We both need some space to think about what this relationship has become." David stared at her, unable to believe what was happening. "Are you breaking up with me?" "I don't know," Anna said honestly. "I just know that what we're doing right now isn't love. It's not healthy for either of us. You're not healing, David. You're just getting more broken, and you're breaking me too." As David walked toward the door, he felt like he was walking toward the edge of a cliff. Without Anna's healing touch, without her gentle words and comforting presence, how was he supposed to survive? How was he supposed to face his problems, his grief, his fear of being alone? Anna, he said, turning back to her one last time. I love you. I love you too, she said, tears streaming down her face. But love isn't supposed to hurt this much. Love isn't supposed to make people smaller and weaker. Real love should make you stronger, not more dependent. David left her apartment that night knowing that he lost the most important person in his life. But as he drove home through the empty streets, he began to understand something that terrified him more than anything else. He realized that Anna was right. He had become so addicted to being healed by her that he'd forgotten how to heal himself. The question now was whether he would learn to stand on his own, or whether he would spend the rest of his life looking for someone else to make him feel whole again. The weeks following that night at Anna's apartment were the hardest of David's life. He spent the first 3 days lying on his couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling like he couldn't breathe properly. Every instinct in his body told him to call Anna, to apologize, to beg her to help him feel better. But something she'd said kept echoing in his mind. You're choosing to stay broken. On the 4th day, David finally got up and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. He looked terrible. His hair was messy, his eyes were red and swollen, and he hadn't showered since losing his job. But more than that, he looked lost, like a person who didn't know how to exist without someone else holding him together. That's when David made the hardest decision of his life. He decided to stay away from Anna. Not because he didn't love her, but because he loved her too much to keep hurting her. He realized that if he truly cared about her, he needed to learn how to take care of himself instead of making her responsible for his happiness. The first step was finding a therapist. David had always resisted the idea of therapy, telling himself that talking to Anna was enough. But now he understood that Anna was right. He needed professional help, not just someone to comfort him when things got difficult. Dr. Rodriguez was a kind woman in her 50s who specialized in grief counseling. During their first session, David told her about losing his father, about meeting Anna, and about how dependent he'd become on her comfort. Dr. Rodriguez listened without judgment, and when David finished talking, she said something that surprised him. It sounds like Anna was a blessing in your life when you needed her most, she said. But sometimes what saves us in the beginning can become a trap if we don't learn to move beyond it. Over the following weeks, David began to understand things about himself that he'd never realized before. He learned that his intense need for Anna's comfort wasn't really about love. It was about fear. Fear of feeling sad, fear of being alone, fear of having to face his grief without someone there to make it go away. Grief isn't something that gets fixed. Dr. Rodriguez explained during one of their sessions. It's something that gets integrated. Your father's death will always be part of your story, but it doesn't have to control your story. David started attending a grief support group at the local community center. The first meeting was terrifying. He sat in a circle with 8 other people, all sharing stories about the people they'd lost. A woman named Carol talked about losing her husband of 40 years. A young man named James shared about losing his best friend in a motorcycle accident. When it was David's turn to speak, he felt that familiar tightness in his chest. But instead of looking for someone to comfort him, he took a deep breath and spoke honestly about his father, about how much he missed their Sunday fishing trips, about how he still sometimes picked up the phone to call him before remembering he was gone. To his surprise, talking about his father in this way didn't make the pain worse. It made it feel more manageable, more like something he could carry instead of something that was carrying him. David also started taking better care of himself in practical ways. He cleaned his apartment thoroughly for the first time in months. He started cooking real meals instead of just eating whatever was easiest. He began going for walks in the park where he and his father used to play catch when David was a kid. The hardest part was learning to sit with difficult emotions without running away from them. When David felt sad, his first instinct was still to call Anna. When he felt anxious, he still wanted someone to hold him and tell him everything would be okay. But slowly, he began to learn that he could feel these emotions without being destroyed. By then, he got a new job at a smaller accounting firm, and this time he made sure to show up on time and do his work properly. When he felt overwhelmed, instead of calling in sick, he would take a 5-minute walk outside and remind himself that he was capable of handling whatever came his way. David also started rebuilding his relationship with his sister Kelly. He called her to apologize for all the times he canceled their plans, and he was honest about what he'd been going through. Kelly was understanding and supportive, and they began having dinner together once a week. "I was so worried about you," Kelly told him during one of their dinners. "You seemed to disappear after Dad died. I'm glad you're finding your way back to yourself." 6 months after that terrible night at Anna's apartment, David was walking through the park when he saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the pond. It was Anna, wearing her scrubs and reading a book during what looked like a lunch break from the hospital. David's heart started racing, but for the first time in months, it wasn't from panic. It was from genuine joy at seeing someone he cared about. He approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hi, Anna," he said softly. She looked up from her book, and David could see surprise in her eyes, followed by something that might have been relief. "David, hi, you look different." "I feel different," David said, sitting down on the other end of the bench, careful to give her space. "How are you doing?" "I'm doing well," Anna said, and David could see that she looked healthier than she had in months. There was color in her cheeks again, and her eyes weren't tired the way they used to be. "I heard you got a new job." "That's wonderful." They talked for about 20 minutes, carefully and honestly, about what they'd both been going through. David told her about therapy, about the support group, about how he'd been learning to take care of himself. Anna shared that she'd also started seeing a counselor to help her understand why she felt so responsible for other people's happiness. "I realized I have my own healing to do," Anna said. "I think I was using your need for me to avoid dealing with my own grief about my brother." As they sat there talking, David felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He felt grateful for Anna's presence without feeling desperate for it. He enjoyed their conversation without needing it to fix anything inside him. For the first time since he'd known her, he was talking to Anna as an equal, not as someone who needed to be saved. "I want you to know," David said as they got ready to leave, "that I'm sorry for what I put you through. You deserve so much better than someone who only came to you when they were broken." Anna smiled, and it was the warm, genuine smile he remembered from their early days in the coffee shop. "I'm sorry too. I should have encouraged you to get professional help instead of trying to be everything you needed." As they stood up to leave, David felt the urge to hug her, to feel that familiar comfort of her embrace. But he also felt something new, the knowledge that he would be okay whether she hugged him or not. He was no longer broken in a way that required her healing. "Maybe we could have coffee sometime," David said. "As friends, no pressure, just if you like to." "I'd like that," Anna said. "But let's take it slow. We both need to make sure we're choosing to spend time together because we want to, not because we feel like we have to." David nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet the following week at their old coffee shop. Not because David needed Anna to heal him, but because the people who had learned to heal themselves had decided they might enjoy healing together. As David walked home that day, he realized that this was what real love looked like. Not the desperate need to be saved by someone else, but the choice to share your life with someone because you wanted to, not because you had to. For the first time in over a year, David felt truly free.